Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video, we are looking at D-Wave Quantum. It is time for another update. And on this chart, we actually have a similar story with what has happened on the INQ chart, the video we have presented yesterday, where we have been tracking a significantly more bullish pattern. We have been looking at a blue scenario that would have allowed this to be instead a series of 1-2 setups that could allow this latest 1-2 to form a wave 3 to the upside that could have been actually quite explosive. So we have been tracking this trend line that would have signaled to us when the shift would happen, when it would have been significantly more likely to break down from this expectation. We had afterwards deeper levels of support for a potential 1-2 setup here. Not even those held. And we can actually even see the result of breaking that trend line, because when it is used correctly, it can be an extremely useful tool for identifying likely failures in uptrends. Not only have we opened the following day right below this trend line, but we haven't even stopped there. No. Within a few trading days, we have actually dropped, like, what is this? 16% from the trend line failure. Now, technically, on this chart, we haven't fully invalidated this idea of a 1-2 setup, not the same way we have done on the INQ chart. But we have broken below the relevant levels of support, we have pushed below the 78.6% retracement, and while we have seen a recovery, it is still difficult to have too much faith in this pattern, because I would have liked for the momentum to be increasing, not to get such a deep correction if this were indeed a series of 1-2 setups. And this should not be interpreted by any means in the way that I am bearish on this chart now. No, we have actually followed through within our initial expectation. We have built an initial 5-wave move to the upside, and we can now track a larger wave 2 correction into the support zone between $18.9 down to $14.6, and against these levels of support, I can expect with high probabilities to form one more high, at the very least within a wave C, if not something more bullish, something like what we are tracking in the white interpretation, which would be a wave 3 to the upside, which would actually prove quite lucrative. We could expect pretty substantial gains in this movement alone, and if the past performances of this chart are anything to go by, we can actually expect it to do significantly more than what we would be looking to do within even a regular wave 3 within an impulse. So let me give you some ideas. If we had already bottomed within this wave 2, which I actually don't necessarily find too favorable, but let's assume we have bottomed and we are building a wave 3. The ideal target would be around $45. I could easily see this surpassed within such an interpretation on this chart. I believe we can be looking at a lot more, even from lower prices, because right now we are actually still pretty far from the last level of support, and based on the current pricing, we would still need to allow maybe 25-30% room to the downside before actually considering a failure of this structure. So I have actually taken this a step further. I am looking at the most relevant levels of support that could allow for a reversal in the case of this structure. I am of course tracking a few different interpretations in the back of my mind for this overall wave 2 correction, but more simplistically, I am sharing here this idea of an A-B-C pattern that could be taking place. Within this interpretation, we would expect to potentially build one more low within this wave C in yellow, and within this one more low, I could very easily see it possible to form a more substantial bottom within this green support box that I have drawn here on the chart. This starts at around $17.5, so the 50% retracement, and goes all the way down to $16.9, around that area. This does not mean that we will definitely bottom within this support box, but this is an area where we have previously formed more substantial bottoms, right? Within this movement down, it has been a pretty substantial struggle to actually get through these levels and form the last necessary low we have been expecting from a larger time frame. We have actually already bounced off of these levels within this wave 4 correction we have been tracking before extending to even higher prices. Also, the wave 4 bottom is actually a pretty common area where a larger wave 2 would form its more substantial bottom. For me, this green support box is probably the most interesting region within this entire white area of support. I don't necessarily expect to not get a wick, a few candles below it. I have actually already provided such a green support box on this chart when we were heading in this previous correction to these lower prices. We've had previous significant lows in this region, but this didn't mean that we couldn't get below this support box. It is actually decently common for the prices to take out such previous lows because these are obvious stop loss levels for very many retail traders. This is where institutions are taking the price intentionally to grab liquidity to manage to fill their positions when looking to weigh in on an asset. The smaller the asset, the smaller the stock, the more likely they are to do this because the more necessary it is, right? If this were maybe Nvidia, Apple, there maybe wouldn't be as much of a need to actually be doing this. But even then, these are levels that are generally going to get filled. These are not levels to place your stop losses. It can actually be said to place your buy orders where you would have your stop loss, which is exactly what we did when we were heading into this larger correction, right? I have actually bought this dip as we were heading into these levels. Now, I cannot guarantee this is the exact path we will be taking. I cannot guarantee that we will form a more substantial bottom within this wave 2 in white, even once we fulfill this as a wave 5. But I believe this is the more likely region to allow for such an outcome. And if we are to consider ideal structures, maybe in an ideal pattern, I would even like a larger wave 2 correction. But to be clear, this is not necessary. And I believe it's possible to form a bottom, especially if we form this additional low within this yellow wave 5. At the same time, if we don't form this wave 5, it doesn't mean a bottom couldn't be in, but even if we break the relevant levels of resistance for a potential wave 4, I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of a reset within the white wave 2. Now, what I would actually be watching for the yellow wave 4 would be here the levels between $18.5 up to $19.3, and if we manage to get a sustained break above the 50% retracement, it would be an interesting signal that at least this idea of an impulse within this wave C would be failing. And again, other patterns within this wave 2 correction are perfectly possible. I don't need to consider even the top of the wave 1 to have been here. I probably prefer it, but without overthinking all of these expectations. We have very clearly defined here the levels of support expected for the wave 2 correction. It is generally best not to overthink the structure, but focus on the actual levels. Then if we go into the smaller time frame, we can actually notice that we have already created a 3-wave move to the upside within this as a potential wave 4. It is within a very small time frame, but I will say, I wouldn't be surprised to actually form one more high in this structure. If we get the sustained break above the last level of resistance, sure, I'm perfectly fine with considering a different pattern than this yellow count where we form one more low into the green support box and then we have a more substantial low. I have no problem with that, but until we actually get it, I believe it best to give it time to unfold. After all, we have already even left the white support zone and the risk-reward ratio isn't too favorable right now. And for now, we will stop here. These are the levels. This is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and if you enjoyed the content and want to support it directly, check out the channel membership, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.